With me today, I have a special guest, Paul Nelhart. Paul Nelhart is a growth-focused consultant who works with founders and leadership teams at the intersection of top-line performance and heart-centric integration. His work centers on helping businesses scale without losing sight of what truly holds them together, the people. Paul is also the host of the Intrinsic Mind podcast, where I have been a guest, where he explores creativity, leadership, and what it means to defend the creative core within us.
Perspective and perception. I think getting caught in it is being able to gain perspective, stepping out, gaining field awareness. Because when you're in the midst of it, in the battle, in the thick of it, it's foggy, you can't see, maybe you can't see past your little fingers, and stuff like that. And you get lost in the fray of the day in the battle. And what happens is our world shrinks the more intense we pull it into ourselves. And what I found is being able to gain perspective is to broadening that view. The mindset has to change, the building has to change, the education, the absorption into the environment, to be able to identify the patterns and absorb the creativity that goes with that, have the confidence, and ultimately become the person. And on that road is fraught with different things. So you don't actually become the person you intended to be, you become something different. And most times, pretty much all times, you become something better version than you anticipated. And it's just different, looks different. And anybody who tries a lot exposes themselves to what somebody else would call failure. I don't really necessarily want to say it. Believe in the word failure, don't believe in the word failure, but I really look at them at resistance points and hurdles. So we're trying to mitigate those and maneuver around resistance and hurdles through the process of that. But obviously somebody would say failed at something. But of course I did, because I tried and I continue to try.
Welcome to Iron and Empathy, the podcast where we explore what it truly takes to build strong, resilient teams in high-stakes environments. I'm your host, Drew Moldenhauer. This podcast is about forging teams with grit, discipline, and accountability, while intentionally building empathy, trust, and psychological safety so people can communicate openly, perform under pressure, and look out for one another when it matters most. Iron and Empathy is proudly sponsored by Blue Ethos Specialized Training, a national leader in workplace violence prevention, active threat preparedness, and de-escalation training. At Blue Ethos, we don't just focus on safety, we help organizations improve workplace culture by strengthening communication, increasing situational awareness, and creating environments where people feel supported, empowered, and prepared to intervene early before problems escalate. Thanks for being here. Let's get into today's conversation. With me today, I have a special guest, Paul Nelhart. Paul Nelhart is a growth-focused consultant who works with founders and leadership teams at the intersection of top-line performance and heart-centric integration. His work centers on helping businesses scale without losing sight of what truly holds them together, the people. Paul is also the host of the Intrinsic Mind podcast, where I have been a guest, where he explores creativity, leadership, and what it means to defend the creative core within us. Paul, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Drew. I love it.
Absolutely. So I was a guest on your podcast, and something that kind of stuck with me when you and I had a conversation afterwards, which was a blast, is I told you about I was building out my podcast and I wanted to do something with teamwork and high stakes teamwork and empathy. And you told me something that I remember stuck with me, and I thought, I got to have this guy as a guest on my podcast. And that was, you were kind of a lone wolf to begin with. And, when you had that, I thought, wow, that's an interesting deal, because I'm always talking about teams in here and teamwork and empathy. And when you said that to me, I thought, there is a lot of solo entrepreneurs out there, solo singers, solo bands, all that kind of stuff. So I thought to myself, I'd love to hear more about how you got your start as a lone wolf.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thanks again for, letting me come on. And our show was awesome, the one that we had together and stuff. So it's interesting because we did talk about that, the team building. I mentioned the lone wolf, and I think there's a few different things with it. One is, I'm going to say we'll kind of go through a couple arcs with the lone wolf, but I actually, at this point in my stage, I almost see the lone wolf as a bit of a mindset. I think, we talked about there's the solopreneurs, there's the independent, the coaches. I mean, anything from a hairstylist to a personal trainer. There's the essence of that. We can even be that kind of intrapreneur. There's the entrepreneur and the intrapreneur. We can have those subsets within the structure. But ultimately, too, is yes, my path was much of a lone wolf, and it was actually more of a lone wolf for many, many years. I kind of found myself in some structures, and I actually found more recently even myself back to that kind of lone wolf. And I don't know if I'm just drawn to it or nobody wants to play in the forest with me. I'm not quite sure, but maybe I'll figure that out sometime.
Right.
But, I think there's a couple lessons. The lone wolf, I think there's an admiration for the lone wolf. There's also kind of that, I don't want to say demonizing of the lone wolf too. It gets beat up and stuff because the lone wolf, is a sense of the grit or, just kind of doesn't play well with others or, it doesn't. And I think that there's that, but I think that there's also the power of what, the lone wolf can really be. And I kind of really almost feel like in the development of that, and I won't overkill the term lone wolf. We'll branch from that, but I really view it as kind of that relentlessly resourceful. There's the, under pressure, you develop the ability to have pattern recognition, creatively work your way through high stress, high stakes environments because the reliance wasn't always there to hide within an infrastructure, within that sense of feeling alone or siloed or by yourself. And again, this could be in any position to some degree. There's a sense of feeling exposed or having a deep exposure to there. But ultimately being able to go through the arc, and we'll go barrel through this, but going through the arc of actually, I almost felt like I had to learn to kind of be a little bit more collaborative. I wasn't resistant to it, so don't get me wrong. I wasn't, but at the same time, there was a little bit of, I probably had a little bit of that sense of like, I had to pick up everything. And
sure.
The side of that is you don't delegate as well if you do it long enough. You're so reliant on yourself, you kind of hold everything close to the cuff a little bit too much to the point where you can suffocate just situationals or the environment, and you don't allow people in. So that's the kind of that dark side of that, that solo there. But the strength is the versatility and the resilience and, being relentlessly creative within the path as well. So that was a long explanation, I think, of what I kind of view the lone wolf as. But I think it's relatable in many phases through the process.
Yeah. And so with that, what were some of the struggles you noticed as far as being out there by yourself? You didn't really, because when I look at things and I see, with my business, I have a business partner and we complement each other really well. You look at other teams, there's certain ones that are, high achievers in this area, but they might be low achievers here, but they're high over here. For you all on your own, what were some of those struggles that you noticed over the years by yourself?
It's a great question. I think there's a couple different things. So I'm going to go really deep on this. I think there can be things of those core levels, we're talking like the Maslow's laws of needs or the security and the survival. At some level, people do sometimes isolate themselves. And I'm going to speak generally, and then I'll come back to me because I feel like it's important to make sure, everything's a little bit relatable to the world here. And there can be trust. You can have issues with trust. Some of it is that I want to do it on my own. I want to achieve it on my own. So there's a high level of, personal assertion into the world. And honestly, oddly enough, some of my memories, and this is nature nurture. So some of my memories were even my parents really almost kind of bashing the corporate America or, the structurals of it's into the environment of the man, the banking systems and the things that are wrong with the world or the big corporation, some of that stuff. And there's these rhetorics and there's these storylines that were all fed through parents, friends, families, not just that storyline, but we're all, schools, peers, cultural, and these things shape us. So some ways they're strengths, and some ways they're to our detriment in those regards. But I would say that in some of the struggles which I kind of touched on already, were some of that, like, I don't want to call it that overly self-reliant or the delegation, because I kind of already said that in that sense. I think there was, it's the outlook of what's achievable from us as an individual, meaning that we go out. I'm going to go back again. Why? So bear with me for a second here, because everything that question really implies is a much deeper heart, really kind of deep with what really drives us and kind of why we do stuff, instead of just the desire of doing something. And I'm going to go two parts on this. One is, when I say I was independent, is I had a small agency and it was a lot of freelance people. So I did have people that I worked with, but it was more contract based. It was like subcontractor. It was project based. So it wasn't necessarily a direct team that I was responsible for. It was just only a per diem, per need basis. And then things into like the real estate world and so on. So there's always people around. But at a deep level, I think there was such a drive for myself for, money and success, that some of it I didn't know how to assimilate into a team effectively. So some of it is, I think I just took myself out of the game, because when I did try to like hire an employee or an assistant early on in my career, I really kind of flummoxed it, to be frank. And because I would assign tasks, but I think at some level it was just never good enough, or it was just, they weren't getting it. Then I beat up on myself and I'd be like, okay, I guess I'm not really a teacher, or I'm not. And it wasn't really like the wheels weren't exactly clicking. Now, some of it is, maybe I self-sabotaged the situation. Maybe I chose the wrong people to be part of it and try to build a team around. And it's accumulative of all this. But ultimately, I think what we're coming back to is that no matter how we do something in life, there's a community. And it's kind of, there's the essence of everything breaks down into really kind of three. Is there's the self, the other, which is a duality. And then the third is some type of community. And the community can be made up of a small team, a big team, a global team, whatever that is. But I had trouble probably putting that team together effectively. And it wasn't until much later as I really learned how to kind of navigate that, which we can touch on a little bit later. So.
Yeah. And I want to touch on something and kind of back up a little bit with you on this too, because I'm curious about this. When I started my career as a police officer, teams all the time. There's tons of teams around. And then I went into becoming a professor and then ultimately starting my own business. But I did notice that there were some disadvantages of those teams that I was around, that I felt like I was always held back of what I really wanted to do. And, I wanted to run my own show and be my own deal. So could you maybe even just back up a little bit for our listeners here and tell them how you got your start into deciding, I'm going to go off on my own. I'm going to be this entrepreneur or solopreneur, and I'm going to go do this thing. What kind of drove you to do that?
Yeah. So again, I like to back it up as well, dial it out. So there's a sense of, at the simplest level, is that I want this new situation, more money, whatever that the version of this is, and I'm here. So there's this idea of, I have to gain the mindset and the willingness to be able to change myself and change my environment in order to be able to endure and stack the skills along the way to become this new essence of, or be somewhere that I'm not currently now. And I did feel that when I was working within an environment. I did of course work jobs at a younger age and, traded time for money. And ultimately what I was learning, even from a pattern recognition at that early stage, as I was identifying, is, okay, the more something is spelled out, the less someone has to pay me. And I don't want to put this all on money, but I'm going to gear it around that. because money's a big thing for everybody.
Absolutely.
But the more something is defined, the more something is spelled out, the more tasks or the steps that a corporation or a boss or somebody else lays out for you, I don't want to say the less valuable it is, because it's not the individual that's less valuable, but the position is the less requirement from it. So in that pattern recognition, I was like, I'm not going to get anywhere near where I want to be in these subsets, in these structures. So the essence was to go out, and it wasn't just for money. So it's a fulfillment and other things else, everything else that goes with that. And I will say one last thing about money too, is that I think people do get hung up on the money, and the money isn't the goal. The money is a means, it's a resource, and everybody's got a little different. It's an energy, it's a litany of different things to different people. But I would say that many times the money is, you're just trying to mitigate the how. I want to do this. Oh, how do I get there? And then you associate it to money, because you're just trying to mitigate all the hows in the middle. So you chase the money, and you don't realize that you're really going after this to stack the skills to be able to become this new person. So the mindset has to change, the building has to change, the education, the absorption into the environment, to be able to identify the patterns and absorb the creativity that goes with that, have the confidence, and ultimately become the person. And on that road is fraught with different things. So you don't actually become the person you intended to be. You become something different. And most times, pretty much all times, you become something better version that you anticipated. And it's just different, looks different. So I completely digress. What was the original question? Yeah. I think it was just how or why I went there, right?
Yeah, and was there one specific thing that kind of struck you, or maybe it was something that appeared to you at one point that you can go back, because, with our subconscious memory, we can usually draw to things that are emotional or things that happen in repetition, that you said, bing, like, all right, I'm going off on my own. I've had enough of this. Or, some people say they had a breakdown, whatever it is.
Yeah. So a lot of times the things that drive us are pain. Pain of, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this discomfort. I don't want this position. I don't want, because I do want this. So then so this is another one with the recognition. It's that, am I running to something, or am I running away from something? So many times earlier in our time, it's running away from something. So, so much of it was, could be, I've tried a lot, and anybody who tries a lot exposes themselves to what somebody else would call failure. I don't really necessarily want to say it, believe in the word failure, don't believe in the word failure, but I really look at resistance points and hurdles. So we're trying to mitigate those and maneuver around resistance and hurdles through the process of that. But obviously somebody would say you failed at something, but of course I did, because I tried and I continue to try. So those fumbles are some of the perpetual motion that gets set through the momentum that pushes us and drives us. And ultimately too, is that we want, and I shouldn't generalize, but many people that do go out and maybe have an adverse reaction to somebody saying, telling them what time they have to be at a job or what they're doing and dictate their pay, and people go out on their own. And some of the challenges, and again, I don't want to generalize, but sometimes they just go into buying themselves another job and now they're working twice the amount of hours for potentially less or the same amount of money, but there also is a sense of satisfaction, and there is a sense of, and this is where too, and I think you use, trying to remember the word you use, empathy, but I like the word grace. We have to give ourselves a lot of grace through these process, because the desires and the drives are going to expose ourselves to those hurdles or failures and the setbacks. So for me, I don't want to say that there was a specific driver. I think there was just a relentless momentum that I was always pursuing. And at a deep level, it's really a sense of freedom. But this isn't when I say freedom, I didn't know this until now, like decades later. I think the freedom and then the ultimate question is what does the freedom mean? And at this stage in my life, I'm jumping way ahead right now, but freedom to me is going to bed feeling satisfied and fulfilled and waking up in that ease and the childlike wonder of an adventure today.
Yes.
And what does that do is we tend to pursue things that feel like they're going to feed the resources of underneath there. And I kind of going back to this resonant theme of kind of chasing those. And ultimately, I'm not going to say there was anything misguided, but we have to go through the journey to have those recognitions and the realizations along the way. So to go back to the original question, I wouldn't say it's just one specific catalyst that really drove me. There's many little stories along the way. And I really hope that doesn't feel like a cop out of the answer, but ultimately I feel like that's really more of what the path was.
No, that's a good point, because in my journey too, and I like how you said that with the failure equals hurdles you're right. Sometimes failure is a word that gets tossed around too much that, when I was a police officer, I was dedicated that I thought I am going to be the chief of police where I am a patrol officer. And I put in for sergeant twice, didn't get it. And I thought, did I fail though? No, I just didn't get that. I didn't get over that hurdle to do that, but it ended up being the best thing for me. And from there went on to be a professor, which I really, really do like. And, it's one of my jobs, full-time jobs right now, which I love a lot about it. But ultimately, too, having that business and deciding to go with it has really opened a lot of doors for me. And when we talk about some stuff with psychological safety, people in those environments, they're not afraid to speak up. They'll take calculated risks. And ultimately, they're not afraid to make mistakes. With you going on your own and deciding to do that, did you take a big calculated risk when you did that, or did you have a safety net? And then also, were you, starting a new business and being an entrepreneur, were you not afraid to make mistakes during that time?
It's really funny during that time, and real quick, I'm going to jump into, I wanted to say too, is that you were being taken care of. You didn't get those positions, and they have the proverbial rejection, and it wasn't a formal rejection, but it's always cool to kind of hear those stories. I'll come back to your question, but I love to hear those kind of stories and because ultimately it led you to where you're at today, speaking, training, coaching,
absolutely,
the litany of everything else. And you wouldn't have done that if you would have
100%
gotten that position, and at the time, maybe that felt like egg on your face, or maybe felt like a back or something like that. That's really cool.
It is. And that's where I feel like the most growth happens, because when I look back on it, it was one of the most devastating, especially the second one. When I got turned down for sergeant the second time, I thought, man, what is going on here? And it was so devastating to me. But then, some people throw this around, and I get it if they don't believe it, but I think certain things in your life do happen for a reason. And it was, you can especially look back on that in hindsight. And for me, looking back on that in hindsight, that was the best thing that's ever happened to me, because I had to decide what to do then. I went back, got my master's degree. I went and became a full-time professor. I traveled. I did all these other things. And looking back on it, I wouldn't have been happy with that position. I'm much happier doing what I'm doing now. So yeah, and that was a calculated risk that I took at that time. I always knew if I had to pull back on something, I could do that. And I wasn't afraid to make mistakes. And I think that's one of the things is when people are going out to be maybe a lone wolf or something, they're so afraid of making a mistake or having that failure that they don't want to take that calculated risk. But like you said, there's that sense of freedom that comes with that.
There is. And what's really funny? This is a little bit, anecdotally, I think this was always humorous. Like, I knew what I knew now, I would say, don't do it. Absolutely not. Or whatever. But I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything either.
Right.
The deep gratitude and the journey. And again, the pain and the sleepless nights.
Yeah.
But the pure exhilaration and excitement of what, trying and exposing yourself to environments that you're unfamiliar, you're in uncharted waters, you don't necessarily know how to navigate everything. And you're honestly fiddle farting your way through the day a lot of times too. And you have enough sense, you're going forward. And that's a beautiful thing is you get to bring all these lessons forward, and you get to bring all the intelligence and the knowledge forward and all those experiences. The key is to not let it drag you down and
Right.
not let it impede you from making, over analytics or, over analysis or overthinking it. As humans, we're very creative when it comes to figuring out things, why something won't work. I think we're kind of wired for it. It's a survival mechanism to identify like, well, it's not going to work because of, I've got like 30 reasons why I shouldn't be. And maybe 2 that I should. Like, all right, let's go. Let's do it. And, but to answer your question is no, I really never had like a plan B in the sense of, you kind of holding on to, the ripcord. I think there were times, and I think sometimes you get so far into something that retreat, and this is going a little bit further, but retreat's actually more painful than moving forward. And you just keep moving, you just keep going on and you keep trudging on. And I don't know if I just still go back to the mindset. I really do. I really believe that, if you wake up in that sense of adventure and something's going to happen, even though you don't have the evidence, there's a little bit of delusion in there.
Yes.
But the thing is I go back to the sense of like, we got to carry all this knowledge with us. We got to carry all these talents, this talent stacking that we are, these individuals, that our personal talents get to bring into this world. And in whatever way, shape, or form, like right now, we're on a podcast just communicating, wherever these words end up, whether they help someone or help many. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. And what an incredible honor that is, to even go with this type of thing. So, so to answer your question is no, I didn't go in with trepidation and a plan B. Now, I would say too, there is the side hustle. There's a lot of people that do an entrepreneur that also do a side hustle. And there is a sense of being responsible if you have a family and everything, kind of stacking your dollars up and having your reserves or building something. Absolutely. There's very intelligent ways to do this. I'm not saying burn the ships and don't turn back. But there is a sense of if you don't burn the emotional and mental ships that are holding you back, you will not, I'll just say something bold, you will not succeed. I think there's one thing when you're leveraging resources effectively, and able to maintain it, mentally, emotionally, physically, because we have to take care of all of our, our body, mind, body, and spirit as well.
Yes.
And at all times, you can't progress if you're really holding on to all the I can'ts, or the what if monsters as well. So.
No, that's a great point. And one of the things I want to do with you too is just with your experience, and I'm curious about yours on this, because I talk about iron and empathy and how iron sharpens iron, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to be professional. That's good and everything. But there's also that human side where you called it grace, empathy, those kinds of things. Was there a point too where when you were going through all this where you were thinking to yourself, boy, I'm really burning myself out, or, I got to slow myself down for me? Because I'll give you an example of, I almost found this addiction when I started Blue Ethos with Rich, and him and I started together, that I was so into it and I was loving it. And I would say 150% into it, where I was working weekends, I was working nights, I was working harder for myself than I ever had. But what I found with that is I was burning myself out, and my body started telling me that. And so I started to have a little bit of empathy with myself of, you got to slow down here, man. Your time is going to fly right by. Like, you're having fun with this, but it's almost like this addiction that you can get really sucked into, and it can start ruining things for you. Did you ever come across that with yourself?
Absolutely. I'll be honest with you, I'm still guilty of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Right.
I get lost in it, and I think it's very easy to do. I think there's also some things too that feel, give you a multi-part answer on this too, because this is always a big subject. I think for a lot of people, this is where people suffer burnout, their health, everything goes with it. But I think that there's couple here. Let me do the health one really quick. I was going to say that's what did it for me. I stopped working out. I'd get some movement, but I wasn't dedicated. That was the first thing to go. Then the next was probably like food. So which just goes back into health again. And then it becomes the emotional addictions and the mental addictions where like I found myself just sitting. I wasn't comfortable anywhere and I had to sit at my desk. And even if I wasn't being productive, I felt like somehow if I'm at my desk, like that's how deep it went for me.
Yeah.
It really goes so deep. And even if I'm not being productive, as long as I'm at my desk, I'm doing something and I'm somehow, and that's where some of the guilt, we build guilt because we build expectations and we think the world has expectations and everything else. And some of that stuff can maybe, if you were talking to a therapist, maybe it started as childhood and everything else. But I kind of have a little funny little saying for myself is like outlaws don't sleep, meaning that like when you're getting, you feel guilty, you feel like you're doing something wrong. You don't sleep, you kind of feel like an outlaw in that sense. I just jokingly say it, but there can be a cost. And I don't know, balance is a funny thing because I think it gets, there was always like I don't even know when the term, I feel like it was maybe the last 10, 15 years, work-life balance. And then, but then it also came into something, there is a joy too. I love talking about businesses, growth businesses and talking about other people's businesses. I love it. I'm having the time of my life. I genuinely love it. And, but it does express itself if unchecked. I also found myself, I have 2 boys and I found myself distracted. I really feel I'm a good father, but I also was like, sometimes I was present, but I wasn't present. I wasn't.
Yes.
And I found myself doing that. And again with the health, and I had a couple of years ago, I had a couple health scares. So I really need to. So if you don't check it, life is going to check it, whatever that word is, universe, life, God, whatever that means something to you, you're going to get checked, you're going to get checked to the boards like hockey, and if you don't taper it off. So, I think just to answer your question, I think it's anybody who's driven, I don't want to say they're bound to, but I think that there's a very high likelihood that we'll experience those. And I think that the guilt one is for a lot of people I've talked to, especially in my podcast too. The guilt one comes up for a lot of people too. There's the obligatory, the obligation. Like, in my case, I'm a father and a husband, have the business. It's all these expectations on what I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to conduct myself. And then you listen to YouTube videos and there's, some 22-year-old kid who's making millions of dollars gains on there. And you're like, oh my God, what did I do wrong?
Right. Yes.
And there's always that, the essence of the, it's very cliche that grass is always greener. And that's not always what it is because we drift off just a hair. But I think we have these experiences. We all have that life journey and we all get to experience all of the pains and the joys and the, in the mind, body, the wealth, the money, the careers, the loves, the friends that we get these. And sometimes I think some people's life lessons hit harder in certain categories than others. We get to feel there's certain things we get to experience deeper than other people. And I think that's where a tendency comes where the grass appears greener because the category that I'm focused and fixed on, that person has that sliver somewhat figured out. That doesn't mean they have all the slivers figured out of all those different categories in our life.
And you bring up something really good that I like. And you've been doing this a lot longer than I have too. And being, an entrepreneur and doing your thing on your own as the lone wolf and kind of going into it, having a team going back out of it. And for the listeners out there that are listening to this, they're thinking, I'm kind of caught up in that spot where I almost have this addiction right now. Was there anything that you've noticed over time that really helped you be present, like you were talking about with your boys and, those kinds of things? Like for an example, for me, what I had to start doing is I had to start going in my calendar and saying, I'm blocking this time off right here in March or whatever for 5 days. And those 5 days, I'm just not doing anything with work, because what I would find myself doing is I would fill those days with other things. And whatever it was, if it was speaking engagements, training, whatever it is, was there things that you have noticed over time that you're like, this is what has worked really well for me?
I feel like I answer everything with a little bit of poetic difference, but
I like it.
Perspective and perception. I think getting caught in it is being able to gain perspective, stepping out, getting a little bit, gaining field awareness, because when you're in the midst of it, in the battle, in the thick of it, it's foggy. You can't see, maybe you can't see past your little fingers, and stuff like that. And you get lost in the fray of the day in the battle. And what happens is your world kind of shrinks, and I'd say you're the general, the royal, is our world shrinks the more intense we pull it into ourselves. And what I found is being able to gain perspective is to broadening that view. I'm not going to say that it's easy, but some of it is, I'm going to go just a bit esoteric in the sense of stilling the mind. Sometimes that's for people, it's meditation, it's breath work, it's all sorts of modalities. And maybe it's just a walk in the park, it's a workout, it's a whatever. And if stilling the mind and listen, hearing that inner voice, we have, as individuals, have inner genius. We have access to infinite knowledge and whatever is in the belief patterns of you. But just in ourselves, we have been exposed. We have experienced way more than our little cerebral brains can process, just from our sensory overload through our life course. So we have intense knowledge. So just being able to gain perspective, pulling it back, and allowing that inner knowing and the inner knowledge to come through a bit, that's helped quite a bit. Again, it's different modalities for different people that might be able to kind of allow that, and silencing the voice. Sometimes this meat sack up here has a tendency of being very loud, and not to mention our phones and our TVs and everything else. But I would say you get lost in the perception of things, and meaning that we suffer. I can't remember the exact phrase or quote, but it's something like, we die, millions of times, or 99% of the time feels like some, the deeper pains than it really happens. I've died more in my imagination than I have in reality. So those deep pains many of them are imagined scenarios. Yeah, they're so wrapped up in our small perception of what this needs to be, what it should be, and that's it. Gaining perspective. If I could keep going a little bit, but I want to just dial that out. That's simplified in that perspective.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's just something that people should pay attention to more, because with both the work you and I do, it is easy to fall into that trap. And, when you and I were talking before about this, you've talked about kind of how you went from a lone wolf perspective, then you went to having a team around you, then back to a lone wolf. And could you kind of tell me about that process and what you went through? And
yeah, without getting too specific on the team and stuff like that, but it was, I had found myself in, I don't want to share too many specifics with the exact thing, but, doing a number of consulting projects, a lot of big things rolling up into that 2020 era, where I think many people had the pause moment when COVID hit. I'm going to say it was March 2020. And for many people, things paused and then they stopped and they died, and whatever that was, depending on your situation. But, if you were a solopreneur, an independent contractor, there's a lot of people that really their life and career path paused very quickly. And even again, too, as I use people like, the fitness people and the salon people and the rest everywhere, it's at every level. So, there was a consulting role that I went into, and then I became part of the staff. And then there was a sell to, equity and through there. And, it was really interesting because being so self-reliant and then having people and resources to collectively as a community pull together, I will say there was a big ease of, oh, wow, this is cool.
Yes.
I've been running so tight for so long.
Yes.
And just white knuckling stuff. And there is a sense of that, really finding kind of that community in that home when it's really an effective team, and everybody's really, the communication is there, the patient is there, the goal sets are I already say palpable, and understandable, simple. People, when they know where they stand in the environment, they know what the expectations are. You can move mountains, you can really do anything. And that's not just career stuff. That's not just work environments. Those are, masterminds, and there's a whole litany of those type of things, networking groups, and, really kind of common goal, people kind of getting together and understanding what it is. But in a career, in a work environment, having the, I think it's Patrick Lencioni talks about vulnerability in leadership. And there is a real power in that, being confident, knowing what that next step should be, but having the allowance and also having the ability to invest in other people on the team, and to help create the internal strengths behind them, so that they are autonomous and feeling secure, feeling strong within their subsets. And that ultimately, I don't think it matters what you're doing, what the team's accomplishing in some sense.
Right.
Because whatever that is, whether it's, sales or scheduling a service, or whatever, you're consulting some level of a customer base, it almost doesn't matter, because when the humans in the environment feel strong, secure, and stable, there's an ease to it. There's a joy, there's a lightness to it. And I don't want to go off on this, because this is what you speak about too at length. And it's such a powerful thing. Now, those things too, it's not specifically with what I was involved with, but there's a number of different things I was involved with. And I've also seen that the other side of that, when the team falls apart. And it's a very sad thing, because, and that can change from a number of different things. I know I'm jumping if this was your next question, but is those ineffective teams, because sometimes there's a lot of things that a lot of companies are selling. I've seen a lot of things like, there's a sell to the company, and the soul of the company actually gets sold. It's really fascinating to watch. And most of it is because the direction of and I'll get to kind of a point here. I'm going to go off on a little bit of
no, I love it.
Many times when a company, in this case that I've seen, is sometimes companies, when they sell or have a heavy management changeover, or a big attrition, or a big team member change, that what was built on the talents, the individual talent stacks, the building, is coming around. Now all of a sudden there's a demand of processes and Excel's charts and financial charting and things like that. So what you're doing is you're actually changing the direction. At one point, the company produced, or the team produced X. It was responsible for this, the forward momentum. So what happens is, in some of these situations, is now we have to turn ourselves around and look backwards, and it changes the direction of what it is. But the expectation is you're supposed to look forward and do this, but there's an essence of stability that gets changed in the environment. And that's in here. I don't want to go off too far on that, because that's exactly what you work on, is some of those stabilities and some of those understanding, again, field awareness, and getting your footing and understanding where you stand.
Yeah. And what would you say with some of the teams that you've been a part of or whatever, maybe some of the mistakes that you've seen some of the leaders make in your own personal experiences that maybe, when I talk to a couple of them, when I talk to people, they say, we have this open door policy, but the leader will never come out to come talk to us. But then they expect that, hey, I have an open door policy, but you never come and see your people. So they're not going to replicate that. Or, I'm one of those leaders that I want you to speak up if something's not right. But then at the same time, as soon as I speak up, you shut me down. Have you experienced any of those in your time that you could expand on?
Absolutely. And here, let's face it, as humans, it's easy to harp on everybody's faults.
Right. Yeah. Right.
As perfect as me.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So I'll say this too, is that over the course of my career, I have worked with hundreds of different companies, many different industries. I've had what I like to call a lot of windows and doors into companies, and windows, kind of just being that little surface level of seeing how they tick, or what's their, how they're roughly structured on the front end. And in doors, where it was a little bit, much more immersive. And at this point, it really is hundreds of businesses that I've been able to. I'm very fortunate in that sense that I've seen to some level. I'd say there's different archetypes in the structure, and we don't really have time to deep dive on all of them. There's things like the artful dodger that I like to call.
Oh yeah.
Or, just artfully dodging around and not really producing anything. There's an authoritative chaos that they create. And then there's the ones that are just, they're experts, but there's no ownership.
Yes.
It's Mr. or Mrs. Advice person, and they're just advising ideas. And what's happening is they're not getting the depth. It's easy to just like drop a little bomb on somebody and then walk away and then come back. And if it didn't work, like, well, why didn't you do what I said? And it's this dodging. And I've seen quite a bit of gap between the people that are doing the actual work and the people that are talking about doing the work.
Yes.
And ultimately, I think some of the big gaps it's winning the day. I literally just had this conversation with somebody recently about the kind of comparing process and the machine, the process, and there's nothing, and both are very, very essential. I'm not downgrading process at all. Process is very important, but process is almost like the supercar, the Bugatti or something like that, driving on a very flat racetrack road that's completely clean of any debris, and
yeah.
Winning the day is like driving a Jeep Wrangler off road and you're just being knocked around.
Yes.
There's something in between there. You can't, I don't want to say you can't, I should never say you can't, but there's the instance of the ideal, that process, just humming smooth, doing, 150 miles an hour on a racetrack. That's great. That's great in a strategy meeting. The day goes sideways constantly. So some of the best leaders have the understanding and the grace of the environment to allow the malleability and it really depends. It depends. I mean, if we're talking about straight, data entry, or there's other things that are very tactile, ticky, but people that are making decisions on the fly, or the external world has a lot of different influences. I can only imagine I'll just use the law enforcement for a moment. I mean, the amount of influences, external influences in the environment of that, I can't even begin to guess. So you can systemize, and I don't want to assume anything with law enforcement, but I'm just saying systemize and protocolize and everything else lies
right
as much as you possibly can. But it comes down to the moment in some regard. And even too in people's day to day. So where I'm going to go with it, I'll come back to the business orientation is again, people feeling lost, everything else. There's people that are dodging around or hiding behind other authoritative figures, or, there's the middle management that, says enough this way and says enough this way to kind of keep. They're all just archetypes and they're people. And I think at the end of the day, I'm going to say something kind of bold, is in the sense that like, we're all just humans trying to get through all of this, all just really kind of doing our best, but whatever we feel our best is, I think, but the best leaders are going to know, how to work with the individual's strengths and the talent stack to win. I'm just going to go back to the winning the day, and winning the day can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different folks, but talking about the day and winning the day are two different things. So I'll leave it at that is this point, because we don't have enough time to go into all the different characters there.
No, and I find that interesting. And I'm just curious, in your lifetime, if you've had someone that you have seen as more kind of that model of a great leader. And, I had that back in my first job as a police officer when I was 12 years with an agency. And I had kind of one of those people they were a supervisor at the time, and they were a conversation opener. And so what they would do is any idea I had, they would open the conversation with that and say, hey, Drew, that's a really good idea. I like this idea. We should go with that. Then I had a couple other supervisors that were more the conversation killers that were, hey, that's a terrible idea. We can't afford that kind of way. And when I just look at that, when I look at leaders too, is I think that sometimes there's a lack of training. It just seems like when they get to a certain area, hey, you're the best salesman here, so we're going to make you a sales team lead, but you haven't had any training with it. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to lead people. You can sell really well, but we're going to put you in charge of everyone. And I don't know if that's a fair assessment to do to people. So I was just curious with you too, if you've came across that.
Yeah. So it's a few different things here. One is that kind of proximity, elevation by proximity of just being there, regardless of qualifications. And I believe that's the level of maturity with the environment, understanding what the larger and the subsets really require and need. So each department really should have like a guiding principles and a line and something to kind of anchor on, not just the global ones, but and so just placing somebody there. Now, the original question you said was, have I ever? I actually am going to go out on a limb and say no. I've never really experienced anybody has a true deep leadership. And I guess if somebody hears this, I don't want to hurt it.
Sure.
I think people have incredible qualities and superpower talents in given arenas. But I will say some of this stuff, may I go a little bit deep on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
So some of this stems from our ability to receive. So it's not just what we're giving, it's our ability to receive and how we perceive, or the perception of what we're receiving, or, the perspectives we take, and going back to that. But I personally, just to be vulnerable for a moment, and kind of the mid-tone of the podcast here, is pattern recognition, in the sense of like what it is as a child, like grew up with a clinically narcissistic father, and then in career paths, as I actually found myself in, I somehow found myself in relational, kind of these working relationships with other narcissists who were the leaders. And covert and overt, and there's all sorts of things. I really almost hate to use the word narcissist because it's kind of been overplayed a little bit, but real true clinical like narcissists as far as that goes. And what I did was I kept jumping to these because at a deep level, I was trying to find the father, that I was seeking. And so I found myself chasing these relatively bad work teams and work dynamics that I was aligned with, and the cultures, and the sense I kept finding this type of archetype, and I'm like, and I could look at it a couple of ways. One is I'm a victim, and I just, it was like no. At a deep level, you're looking to be probably, as a child, you're looking at that little child going, I want to be loved by my daddy, so I'm going to find somebody and help to build their company and do all these things for them, and finding the similar archetypes,
right.
People that I ended up being gravitated to because I was probably feeling those things. So where I'm going with that is that some of the victimization in these environments, I don't want to dismiss a safe environment or anything. Some of it is interpretive. Some of it's how we receive it, because ultimately in a work stage, and if you have other feedback on this, please do. But in a work environment, I was going to say, we're trying to get somewhere. We're trying to have progress. We're trying to feel fulfilled, feel like we want deep contribution. I think as humans, for the most part, really want to feel like we're contributing into the team. So when we might not feel safe, it's a lot of times just because we're feeling some resistance point that's stifling or holding, or hurdles or walls that are holding back our contributions in some sense. Now, don't get me wrong. There's very unsafe work environments. So I'm not discrediting that. I'm speaking in a very generalistic term.
Right.
But a lot of it is our interpretive view of what and our feelings of being boxed in, siloed, not heard, and all these things. And that's a real thing. It's not that I'm not saying this is imagined scenario. It's a real thing. But some of it's an individualization of it as well too. So there's a balance there, that you might have a manager or a boss that's maybe they're just trying to figure it out. They're a little bit scared, but they come off incorrectly. You have this, this dance that's not quite melding in there too. So
interesting.
This arena is actually something that you work deeply in.
Yes. And no, I appreciate that perspective because I never thought about it that way too, but your past can dictate that. And that starts making sense kind of psychologically with some of the relationships that people have, both, they're looking for that. And for you, how you found that in your job is interesting because some people relationship have the same issues where maybe their husband or wife, they're looking for that part that they're missing and they're, how they can get into that kind of bad culture area, and that's what they're seeking out. So I find that
attracted too. If it's
yes,
part of your family dynamic, if it's part of your friend pool,
yes,
you kind of find it, or you go somewhere and you plant the seed, and then there's always that, like, somebody will call them a Cancer or a C player or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they're just stirring the pot and talking, and all of a sudden it matriculates and other people are starting to do it because there's little default mechanisms. But, it becomes an uncomfortable arena for people that are not used to it, don't want to be part of it. But the ones that do tend to really kind of weed together,
yes,
environment too. But I think that comes from a lot of our past, that we bring all that stuff forward. I think whether we want to or not, and some of it is just trying to get attention, trying to be fulfilled, and how we go about it, is built on the stacks of our past to some degree. But ultimately too is like where we want to go is where our actions dictate today. So again, we don't have to get too deep into that, but.
No, that's a good point. And you know what? With saying that, not today, but I could see us doing a part 2 on this, Paul, because I really enjoyed this. And so with that, you're a successful guy. What would you say is your key to success that you could share with other people listening to this podcast, for a guy that's done it, been on his own, been an entrepreneur, been out there? I mean, you've had a lot of successes with that. What would you say is your key to success that you would share with others?
This is going to sound unconventional.
Okay.
It's ignorance. Now, what I mean by that, we bear with that. So it's ignorance. And what I mean by that is not being fixed on the world of what the expectation or what I'm told to do. If anything, what this path has led me to was the ability to see beyond what the world or what is dictated. There's a assimilation, and there's being productive, and there's working with people and collaborating. There's also a sense that just because something structurally somebody did it before you doesn't mean it has to be done like that again. So I did the ignorance just for a little bit of shock value, but really it's a childlike wonder is what it really is. That sense of adventure, because when we have that sense of wonderment, adventure, excitement, it raises a little bit of something in us, and we're like, oh, that's going to be fun. It's tactile. We're figuring it out. I always think of like a little kid playing with like kinetic singing or something like that. We're kind of, feeling our way through it in the sense of like, is this working? Is it not? But having enough confidence and again, the ability to bring all of our knowledge forward. But I would say really like a childlike wonder or a sense of adventure. And
I like that.
A little bit of ignorance because, if I don't know it was done that way, then I don't have to do it.
Ignorance is bliss sometimes. I mean, no, I think that's great. I love that advice to say to others too. And like a child, and I love your outlook on that whole deal too, of keeping it positive and going at that and keeping that energy up. So that's great. Say, Paul, how can others get a hold of you or listen to your podcast? Do you have a website out there? How can people get a hold of you that way?
So my podcast is Intrinsic Mindset on Instagram and all the other usual channels. I've actually taken a little bit of hiatus and I'm coming back again. I took a little bit of a break. My website is paulnelhart.com and doing a little bit revamp to that. But please, DM me on social media anytime. Go to my website and shoot me an email. I'd love to connect with people and, we'll explore and expand together.
Fantastic. And I can definitely see us doing a part 2 here coming up here in the near future. So with that, today's conversation is a reminder that real growth isn't just about scaling systems, strategies, or revenue. It's about scaling awareness. The leaders who endure aren't the ones gripping tighter to control, but the ones who are willing to evolve who they are as the organization evolves around them. That's the work, and it's ongoing. Thanks for spending time with us today on Iron and Empathy podcast, Paul. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you again. Look forward to having you in the near future.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate it.
All right.